tap the side of the medal. Hello, we'll be right with you. Turning the lights on. And welcome back. Merry Christmas. This may very well be the last video we do for Christmas. If so, have a great Christmas. It's a great time of year. You know, lots of wonderful things go on. Just checking out my hair.
I would too, but
Your hair's.
I look here on the chest.
You don't have a hair out of place.
No,
you don't have a hair. Okay, so today we want to look at PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs. There's some interesting things that have come out in the last couple of weeks. First of all, there's USADA, the USA drug admin. You know that they administer the drug control, and particularly in sport. What have they gone and done?
They've gone and hid from WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association. They've gone and hid some of their athletes that have tested positive for PEDs, for performance-enhancing drugs, yet not told the higher organization, the WADA organization, and essentially let them go and compete for long periods of time. I don't think they've specified the exact amount of time, but we're talking, from my understanding, years to the end of the athlete's career, knowing that they were on PEDs and letting them go ahead with it, and using the athletes who are using PEDs as feedback to find out who else is doing it, to try and get other people. So kind of some dirty stuff going on.
I remember reading a document where one particular athlete, well, Carl Lewis, it's public knowledge now, but at that stage he was still competing in the Olympics, and they had done exactly that. Is that apparently, allegedly, he tested positive for drugs, but they just let it ride. They said they'll do their own investigation after the Olympics.
Yeah,
and he went and won all the gold medals, and then they looked at him and said, "Well, no, there's nothing to see here."
And there was also, I think, during a time, all of a sudden, Carl had braces as at some point of his career, which is usually reflective of changes to bone structure, which is associated with certain drugs as well.
That's right. And one of the things which is quite common with certain drugs is the bones that seem to grow, the mandible, the jawbone, and the bone that causes the elbow to protrude. And quite often you'll see athletes in their late 20s, early 30s, way beyond the time that they normally be getting braces, all of a sudden have to get braces because as the mandible grows, their teeth get all out of shape and they lose their bite and so on. So that's very interesting.
It is
as well. So at the end of the day, what USADA, this USADA revelation has brought to light is that pretty well anyone will do anything if it's an opportunity to win, particularly in the Olympics. You know, you've got a cold war going on in the sports arena, and forever, even back in East German days, one of my old friends who trained with us briefly, Steve Holland, was a fantastic athlete, and he became very good friends with some of the East German athletes. And he was saying over the years that in their communications, as friends communicating, some of the interesting information he was hearing from them, the physical effects of the drugs that they were put on unwittingly as teenagers as part of their vitamin program.
I've actually got a paper on my computer. I don't have access to it now, but about the East German doping program. It's been, it's public knowledge and what they did and so on. And if you want to look into it more, not just the East German side of things, but the Soviet side of things, there's a sensational documentary on, I believe it's on Netflix, called Icarus. And that is incredible, and how that storyline changes over time. If you just want to see how far people go, as Xiao was saying, to win, and the things that they do, they go to the extremes of cutting holes into the rooms where the urine and blood samples are to be able to switch them out, and the tamper-proof lids, they figure a way to untamper them and switch urine at night at 2 a.m. and things like that. So this is all really well documented stuff.
So what happens is the people who cheat are always slightly a step ahead of the people who try to prevent the cheating, because they're all medically trained. So they all know what the detectors know what they're detecting, and the cheaters know how to avoid detection. So it just becomes a big game, really. And to me, then it becomes very much a personal choice. There's one famous Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or grappling athlete, Gordon Ryan. He's just come out recently.
Yeah, he did a YouTube video, I believe, yesterday or the day before about his use of PEDs, and he talks about it openly and justifies why he's doing it.
You can rationalize and justify anything. And I think what happens, it's a little bit like smokers, gamblers, drinkers. You know, particularly gambling. I was thinking today how the gambling industry has such an evasive presence in Australian sport, even to where you've got professional TV broadcasts of different sport is actually presented by the gambling houses. You know, here's Joe from takeabet.com and we've got 5-1 on
the first try scorer and all that stuff.
You know, and the gambling industry has been burned into the minds of Australians, even from, I can remember in grade 5 or 6. So I'm talking about 11 or 12 years old, 10 or 11 years old. The teacher whispering in one of the boys' ears, one of the lads in the class was a horseman, because I went to school in a country area. And we found out later that the teacher had pulled him aside and had a little wager, had a little bet on who would win the Melbourne Cup, really, with this kid in grade, this 10-year-old kid. And we were all into it. Like we all, it was openly. Now, the only way that happens is you find a way to rationalize and justify it. Okay. And it's the same with performance enhancing drugs. If you're going to use them, there's two things that happen. One, your conscience stays as it is, and you pretend you never did it. You don't admit to anyone you ever did it. You never tell anyone you ever did it, even though the physical evidence is right there in front of anyone's eyes. All of a sudden, your improvements, if you're a time athlete, well, your time improvements are insanely beyond the possibility of just good training. So there are those people who have done it but would never admit it. I mean, they'll have health problems and operations and all kinds of things that'll happen, which arguably are directly connected to their use of performance-enhancing drugs, but they still never admit it. On the other hand, you got the ones that openly, brazenly admit it, and they say, well, yeah, I use it. It's not illegal in the sport that I'm in. They don't test, and I use it for this, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, there's a lot of ways to justify it. Now, Charlie Price, who was the speed coach. Charlie Francis. Look, I wrote Charlie Francis. But Charlie Francis, who was the speed coach of Ben Johnson, who got busted, won the gold medal in the 1988 Seoul Olympics, and then probably got turfed out. Well, he was the fall guy.
He was absolutely the fall guy.
And out of the final 8, 6 of those 8 have consequently been proven that they were also using the drugs. But Charlie Francis wrote a really interesting book, which you've mentioned previously, and it's called Speed Trap. And in that book, he points out that you don't actually take drugs to get an advantage. You take drugs to catch up on the disadvantage that you have because everyone else is taking drugs. Okay? Any nation that suggests that their athletes are psychologically and emotionally above ever thinking of doing drugs, you got another thing coming, I think.
You do. There's even here in Australia, sometimes we think we're on our high horse with things, but there was a fantastic book written by a discus thrower called Positive, just before the year 2000. And that was an Australian athlete talking about, it's out of print now, but it's a phenomenal read about the realities of competing in track and field at the international level.
Now, if you think about it, you look at the final of the 50 meters freestyle, and from first to last in that final was less than maybe a third or a half of a second.
Yeah.
So if you come from one of those countries where winning a gold medal means it changes your life, you win a gold medal, you get an apartment, you get a dietitian, a couple of coaches, and a salary and everything. Or if you come second, you get none of that. So you got to fund your own training career. And if the difference between a gold medal and a silver medal is like a couple of hundredths of a second, and someone says, well, if you do this drug, it'll help. Of course, the temptation is tremendous. It goes beyond the average person's ability to stand strong in that sort of thing and stand on their morals. And it takes a very strong belief system and value system to turn your back on something that can make such a powerful difference to your life. I've known plenty of guys that have used them. I'm sure half of them think that I don't know that they do, but it's like when you go to the doctor and you got a cold and you walk in, you got sniffles, and I go, I'm not feeling well. And the doctor goes, yeah, you got a cold. He goes, well, you don't say prove it. He goes, all right, let me take a blood test. There you go. There's your proof. Well, it's the same with people who do performance enhancing drugs and somehow compromise their own belief system and value system. And you can look at them, and there's just like physical evidence, just like there's physical evidence of a cold that tells you got a cold without having to go and get a blood test. It's the same with performance enhancing drugs. There's just too much evidence that if you know what you're looking for, points towards it. And you don't need a blood test to prove it. To prove it, I've never been proven,
Well, Lance Armstrong was a good example of that. He never tested positive at any point in time, but in the end, they got him through circumstantial evidence, essentially.
Yeah, and he went to the point where he was suing his teammates for millions of dollars for libel when they would say, yeah, we all did it. We'd all go in and they do this. And he, even though they were admitting that they were part of his team and the whole team was doing it, he would sue them for libel. Later on, it came out that all seven Tour de France victories were done when he was using performance-enhancing drugs. Long story short, I won't mention the person's name, but a karate friend of mine told me point blank, I know he's using it because I was administering it to him during some of his health protocols at one stage. So there were people everywhere knew he was using it, but in his public persona, he would never admit it. And I think that's very common amongst people who use drugs. I think another thing too is the long-term emotional impact. So when people actually, you're running along and you're average, and then you use drugs, and all of a sudden your systems are firing at a rate way beyond they ever were before. You get used to the incredible change in your physicality, and you get used to the adulation that comes with that from the fan base and so on. What happens when you come off it?
It's a real challenge. I've seen a lot of people use drugs and then have to come off them at some point, not have to, or choose to come off them at some point in time. And the back end of that is not, there's nothing glorious about it. They've gone from super physiological, really like firing on all cylinders, like Xian said. And then all of a sudden, like there's one story I'm thinking of a guy that I know. This is when I was very young, and he was in his 40s at that time, and he'd used drugs all his life. And then he ended up going to jail for something unrelated, and in jail suffered a stroke and didn't get access to his drugs anymore. And I saw him after jail, and he was a shadow of him for myself. And the 20-kilo plates that you pick up, like you can pinch them like this and pick up 20-kilo plates in the gym. He couldn't do that anymore. They felt really heavy. So he jumped back on. And that was his emotional reason for jumping back on, because he couldn't deal emotionally without being able to pick up 20-kilo plates like they were a feather. And this is how fragile the mind can become. I could go on with stories like this. It's not a good thing, the back end. Everyone thinks when they're young and the front end and the benefits they're going to get, but they don't understand the back end of coming off, which is something in itself.
Yeah, very much so. So that psychological, emotional impact is very significant.
And Xian, you were talking about the impact of the liver too, not just from a physiological point of view, but from an energetic point of view.
Well, yeah, look, I'm not a doctor, and I know nothing about the deep medical implication. But what I do know is I studied traditional Chinese medicine at one stage, and in Chinese medicine, every organ in the body is related to an emotional state. And that makes sense when you think about it. We talk about fear and the kidneys and wetting your pants under fear. We talk about being moved by the emotion of love, and you feel that in your heart. flutters in your stomach, that sort of thing. And we talk about Roid Rage. Now, it's interesting that Roid Rage, when you take excessive drugs, particularly oral drugs, it has an effect on the liver. The liver has so many roles, more than 2,000 functions. And by using drugs, exogenous drugs, which interfere with the body's natural systems, the liver is the thing that tries to sort it all out. Okay. And in traditional Chinese medicine, the emotion that is connected to the liver is rage and anger. So when your liver is not functioning well, a common side effect is that rage, and anger. And isn't it interesting that steroids, which is just one of the performance enhancing drugs, affects the liver, and we see that reflected in the emotion through what is commonly called roid rage. And there are people who are normally quite placid people who start to use a lot of drugs like that, and all of a sudden they start having these emotional outbursts which they can't even work out themselves. I think it's really interesting that I talk about performance enhancing drugs in the book, and I point out that it is a very much a personal choice. But as Sensei Mike points out there, the only, I think there's, you can think of more. I can think of two reasons why you'd want to use drugs. One is to improve your sporting impact for personal reward. So particularly money or something like that, or if you're an athlete and you're hell-bent on winning and you can't quite win, so you take the drugs, all of a sudden you can't quite be defeated. I think that's very important in the sporting aspect. But martial arts, particularly Budo, from the Budo perspective, the sporting aspect is literally nothing. It represents such a small part of your Budo journey. And if the goal of the martial artist is perfection of the character, perfection of the self, not physiological superiority, well then clearly the question of ever using steroids or performance enhancing drugs doesn't even arise in your mind. If you're focused on the clarity of the Budo path, the shugyo, the training for life in Budo, well then using drugs, it doesn't even arise in your head, and it shouldn't. And I guess if a person trains in karate to best others, the enhancements might seem attractive. But if your training is aimed at not losing to your ego, then no enhancements will do any good. Exactly. That's the point. In that Budo is not about the physical enhancements. Budo is about the perfection of the inner character, the spiritual journey more than anything else. And in that respect, there is absolutely no rationalization or justification that works for using drugs. UFC, I don't know. I think UFC has started the test now. I think maybe it got to the point where they had to, but there are other sports, particularly some of the grappling sports, where they don't test.
Yeah, the UFC, from my understanding, Marco, they're not with USADA anymore. They're with some other organization. The reason they did that, from what I've heard, is they wanted to stop testing athletes on the day of the fight, waking up at 4 a.m. on the day they fight. They were doing that sort of stuff. So this other organization won't do that. I guess it may lend to some stuff going on, but on the whole, I believe the testing is similar to USADA's testing. But as we just talked about earlier, USADA as the organization, I mean, this is published, came out and let people do what they want, certain athletes. We don't know how political it can get behind the scenes. I say that not knowing any information on it, just that these things have happened, so who's to say they won't happen again?
The best diet is a diet that is any diet that suits your own constitution, and that means that it's non-inflammatory. It doesn't stimulate the body in the wrong way, and in that respect, drugs are completely out of the question, because there is no constitution which can maintain a natural health when you use performance enhancing drugs long term. And like Roland says there, the risk-reward factor needs to be taken into consideration. If you want to do drugs, it's up to you. If I tend to think that there is, like I said, the two reasons: one, for sports performance, which means more money in professional sports. The other one is, as you get older, particularly men, and you have the testosterone levels go down, well, using testosterone replacement therapy could be somewhat justified, I think, because by using that therapy, then you're able to improve the body's physicality despite aging. Having said that, once you start,
it's difficult to stop, basically. And the other thing too is we still don't know for sure in massive sample sizes long-term use of these things. When I say long-term, I'm not talking 10 weeks or 10 months. I'm talking 10, 20, 30, 40 years on these things. And there's some case studies, sample sizes of one, not big case studies. I've seen people throughout their lifetime do it with super physiological levels of drugs, steroids in particular. And from my seeing it, it probably hasn't ended too well for them. So, but each to their own. We've all got to make our own decisions in these areas.
That's right. But if you're as a Budoka, if your goal is Budo, well, then the goal of Budo, of course, is the perfection of the character, according to Funakoshi Gichin. The ultimate aim of the art of karate is perfection of the character of the participants. Okay. Well, character is not the physiological side. Character is the psychological, spiritual, emotional side. So in that respect, well, then I think any dedicated, intelligent Budoka, the thought of doing drugs wouldn't arise in their head. Some people argue that because certain sports it's legal, they're allowed to do it.
Yeah.
But as Mitch pointed out, well, smoking is legal and drinking is legal,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of things that are legal which aren't necessarily intelligent. Okay, just because something's legal,
you're letting something external from yourself be the moral compass instead of your own internal moral compass in that regard. And that's not a judgment; it's just what it is, and we're all a little different. So
I think if you're ever tempted to use performance-enhancing drugs, give me a call. I'll talk you out of it, because there is no, in my head, no rational. The only time I've ever used performance-enhancing drugs was I remember one day before a tournament in 1980, I forget what, 84, 85. I had a cup of coffee in the morning, and I felt so guilty because someone told me that caffeine can be a stimulant. And I thought, oh my God, I feel so bad. It was a coffee.
You shouldn't feel bad, Shaun. These days, people can't get through the day without coffee or two. So
yeah, indeed.
Anyway, that's another story.
Yeah. So whilst I think of it, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. It helps us. We're getting close to the numbers that we're always looking for. That could mean anything.
Yeah.
But anyway, subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment. If you comment, generally speaking, I try to reply to all of the comments, or at least acknowledge them. But by all means, if you find what we present here is worthwhile, then mention it to your friends, and also contribute. If you've got any input, leave a note, leave a message, and if you've got a question, we'll address that in a future episode. But there you have it. We'll leave it at that. I think performance-enhancing drugs, at the end of the day, it's your choice whether you use them. But if you're a Budoka as opposed to a sportsman, there is no rational justification. It's just it clearly wouldn't even arise in your head. If you're a sportsman where the outcome of an event means money, and this is one of the reasons why Solsai was so against professional fighting, because he realized that people would compromise their value system, compromise their belief system, and compromise the reputation of themselves and their own martial art just for the sake of winning. There you have it.
Should I make one last comment on this? A lot of people who choose to go down that path, in my experience, they'll take that path because it's the most convenient, quickest, and easiest path, rather than sort their training out, rather than sort their recovery out, their nutrition out, their sleep out, so on. Because there's a lot of stones you can unturn to optimize your training and lifestyle to change everything in our body, our flexibility, our strength, our power output, our technique, our skills, our psychology, our hormone levels, all that kind of stuff can be done through great training, great recovery, and so on. And I see these days it seems to be, just go the quick route rather than actually put in the work and figure out how to do it a more natural way.
Exactly. So as Roland says, the risk reward is something you need to seriously consider, because you look at modern history of athletics, and so many people who have used performance enhancing drugs die at a very young age. And if they don't die at a young age, they certainly suffer all kinds of physical trauma through their entire age. Some people know of Louis Simmons.
Louis Simmons is one. He was famous. He's a, for those that don't know, he's in the strength training world. He's a powerlifting athlete. He's passed, and he from all reports, and he sort of said this himself, that he never came off gear for his whole career. He was just permanently on. And if you saw him in the latter years, his body probably wasn't in a very good state. Wasn't too mobile, wasn't moving around too much, and so on. So that's a sample size of one. So it doesn't confirm anything, but that's just again a long-term study into someone's choices.
You need to give that risk-reward factor some serious consideration. 1992 Olympics, they asked the athletes, if you could take a drug that guaranteed gold medal but meant you were dead by 35, would you take it? And 75% plus said yes.
Yeah.
The reality was, though, I know that that's very easy to say, because what happened is they followed up with that and they said, well, here's that drug. And a lot of them who said yes, they would, change their mind, said no, I wouldn't, because they wanted to be around after 35. So the risk reward, the emotional impact, and the compromise of your value system and belief system really needs to be considered. Just don't do drugs. It's that simple. Budo has nothing to do with that. Okay. Anyway, thanks, Mitch.
Thank you, Sharon.
Shame on USADA. But anyway, we'll keep plugging on. Hope you got something out of that. Thanks for coming along, and look forward to seeing you. If we don't see you before Christmas, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And we'll see you in the new year. Of course. Thank you, everyone.